Okay. Under our first module, again, which is called creating a high performance, which is what you do first in corporate, right? You build your team, right? I don't know how many of y'all have been at this level or not, but if you have, feel free to speak up because I'll share my experiences so this will make sense. But I also need you to share your experiences if you've been down this route before, running a project. Within creating a high performing team with the course content, the first thing you do is build your team. That makes sense, right? It didn't used to say that with the old exam. The next thing you want to do is define team rules, because once you get a group of people together, you need some rules in place. If you're autocratic and working by yourself, that's easy. But just because you think you're cool, everybody else doesn't. So there has to be team ground rules amongst 15, 20 people. Then you want to negotiate project agreements. Well, what type of agreements? We'll get to that in a second. You as a servant leader and as a transformational leader that's over that project, you want to empower your team and the stakeholders along with it. We'll talk about the distinction between those. And there's not, well, then you want to train your team members and your stakeholders, you meaning you, the project manager. Then you want to engage and support virtual teams, which we've already done now because of COVID, right? And then your job is to also build a shared understanding about whatever project that you're governing or being a servant leader to, right? So this is our module, and these are the topics under that module. There's 7 of them. All right, so building a team. All right, so with every module, you're going to see deliverables or outcomes that should happen in building your team. One of the outputs should be, and I think I heard Maria say this, a RACI matrix or RACI chart. Was that you, Maria? Somebody mentioned this.
Yes, it was me.
Yeah. You have what we call pre-assignment tools. In other words, when you're starting your project, there is a tool set under PMI where there are, a tool set for pre-assignment. Then, of course, we're all working in this, well, most of us are working in virtual teams at this point. Some of the tools that to get this done is your skills list, some of the technologies that we use today. We're using one now called Zoom. We need our resource management plan when it comes to human resources. Well, also some equipment. We need our rates, meaning per hour normally. And then we need our resource assignments. So these are some of the deliverables and tools that come out of building a team, right? So. Okay. So when we're talking about resources, one thing I want to, there's a distinction, which you already know. Resources are the human part. It can also mean human, equipment, material, supplies, things of that nature. Now, every time a definition comes up, you're going to get a lot of these. And these are something that you want to pay attention to. They're pretty self-explanatory. But when you're studying for your exam, make sure you understand the definition. You don't have to actually memorize them, right? So this is the actual definition of a project team. Every time a definition comes up, I'm going to be quiet and let you read it, okay?
Project team, a set of individuals who support the project manager and perform the work of the project to achieve its objectives.
All right, now what's on a project team? From a PMI perspective, and everything is going to be from a PMI perspective because we all have work experience perspective, but for the purpose of the exam, we go by what's on the list. That's why I tell you from the beginning, separate work from the exam content, right? Even some of the things that you'll see in there, oh, I'll see that at work, but it's not called that. And that's why it's good to separate them, right? So project team can be, there are different roles, right? You can actually have your project staff members who perform activities like budgeting, scheduling, reporting. I heard a couple of people, at least one, that's a project coordinator that's on the call. You have your project actual staff members who actually perform the work. Say, for instance, if you're building a web app, then we're talking about your database administrators, your systems admins, your informational architects, your enterprise architects, actual programmers and developers, right? Then you have your supporting experts, which come from legal, logistics, engineering, testing. I'm an IT baby, so I give IT examples, right? So you have to incorporate that with what you do. Then you have business partners, right? You know, every project is going to have some outside suppliers, contractors, and business partners, right? So these make up a project team. In other words, you're sitting at the head of the table as a project manager. These are the people you're looking at, whether they're virtual or not, right? All right. You, along with maybe your project champion, which is your sponsor, when you start working to build your team, a critical part of doing that is, you know, kind of estimating and acquiring and then managing those teams, estimating other resources or teamers that you're going to need to carry out that same work. Then you have to go to work to actually obtain those people, right? In corporate, I'm just going to give you examples that I've gone through. One of the most dynamic project management office that I've worked for was a company called Cox Enterprises, right? The big media conglomerate. Some of you guys have probably heard of them. They had an exceptional PMO office, exceptional. I mean, thing was put together. I was on in there for a year as a contractor. But in terms of developing, and everything was already put in place. It made the work for the project manager very easy, except for when it came to, as contractors, it's kind of hard to get people that are full-time to get their work done on time. That was the only challenge I had. Other critical pieces is tracking team performance, creating and executing improvements, you know, based on the feedback, actually feedback from yourself and the team members. Right? Other team member requirements. Need to have enough relevant skills, as we already, if you're project manager, you already found that out, right? And again, when you're in a functional environment like I was at Cox, and I've done some work down at Coca-Cola because I'm based out of Atlanta, and Home Depot. Those are three that I've actually done consulting work in over the years. But finding those relevant skill sets and then getting the functional managers who are actually full-time to lend them out to your project. That's where the negotiation thing comes in at. One thing you want to do over in this first box is avoiding single point of failure. In other words, if you just got one programmer on your staff, right, or one whatever that's good at what they do, okay, that person goes out sick, what are you going to do? Well, these are things that you're going to have to start thinking about early on in the project. Leveraging some of the core competencies, you know, within your team, and make sure you have adequate physical resources like equipment. I heard somebody talk about running a lab. I don't know if that was Kevin or Adam. You're over labs or something like that?
Lab, yeah, that me. Adam.
Okay. Okay. Okay, we talked about this once before. So we're talking about building a team. So part of your project management team was what we just looked at. These are the technical people. Now, I don't mean IT. These are everybody that's in your area that's close to you. Now, also, you're going to have stakeholders, right? Stakeholders, here's the definition. Just kind of read it to yourself, if you don't mind. But this is important because stakeholders also include your own team member. This is anybody that's going to be affected by your project, whether indirectly or directly. Okay. Now, whatever environment you're in, you're probably going to run across these types of steps. First, customers. Somebody's going to be the end user, right? Sponsors. These are people that normally champion your project. Again, these are all the project stakeholders. Not all, but a great list of them. Managers, whether they're internal or external, but definitely internal. The employees themselves. It depends on the product, service, or result that your project is going to deliver. What type of employees is going to be involved. Also, it could be, I've heard somebody say something about doing church projects or community service projects. Definitely, if you're with the government, it's going to be affecting the community. There could be just end users of a particular application, right? We're the end users of our banking applications, right? I mean, we are actually end users or customers. Then you have your suppliers, you know, your outside people that if you can't get it in-house, you have to go outside and get it, whether it be people, material, supplies, etc. Right? All this spans out from your organization. So project stakeholders covers a vast amount of individuals, but make sure, you know, well, you don't have to make sure. It's people that are going to be affected directly or indirectly by your project. So you got your project team, which we covered. Then you got your project stakeholders. Right? Remember we talked about that process chart? If you have it printed out, if you look over there under initiating project, one of the first things you want to do in your project is start identifying those same stakeholders. This is going to be key because this is a process that's done throughout the duration of your project. So they take on various roles. We already talked about that. We saw the little circle that includes just about everyone, right? So identifying internal and external stakeholders of your project as early as possible and learn what they need, secure their participation in the project. Also, one of the things that's going to be difficult doing is negotiating consensus early in the project along with your stakeholders or with your stakeholders, right? And one thing that you're going to create is what they call a stakeholder register. So one of the things identifying your stakeholders is creating a register. That register is going to be your primary document throughout the duration of your project. And this is important. This is your first project document that we start talking about, the stakeholder register. This will pop up on your exam. Okay. And just as it says, the register is a document that exists that lists the stakeholder, what department they're working in, contact information, whether they are influential in the project, whether they have any power in the project. This is a document that you kind of want to keep to yourself, but this is where you document all your stakeholders in what they call a stakeholder register. This is exam material right here. Okay, so repeating your stakeholder identification, that is a tool and technique. Every time you see the word tools and techniques, it really goes back to that chart. So on that chart, stakeholder identification, the way you start identifying stakeholders is using expert judgment. I want to talk about this particular tool or technique right here. You're going to see this throughout the duration. Anybody ever heard the term subject matter expert or SME?
Yes.
Okay. Just think of you sitting at the head of the table, you're the project manager, or whether you're virtual or not. Everybody else on that call is normally a SME, subject matter expert. They're good at something. They're part of your team. Okay. You're probably going to see this with every process. In this process, we're talking about stakeholder identification. You're not going to be doing all this stuff alone, as we have learned in our real job, in the jobs that we work in. You're going to need your team. Another tool and technique that's going to be done throughout the duration of your project is a technique called data gathering. We're always acting on something, right? It's because of some data. Well, one of the tools and techniques throughout project management is called data gathering. Just as it says, you can do it in various ways. Questionnaires and surveys, brainstorming, meaning you and your team sitting around thinking about things or thinking things through. Another tool and technique that you use for stakeholder identification and other things is called data analysis. Well, once we've gathered all the data that we need, we analyze that data. In this case, we're analyzing stakeholders. Again, like we said, whether they are influential, whether they have power, whether they're going to be engaged or not. These are important things to know early on in the project. So what we're telling you is, A, yes, you want to identify your stakeholders, but then you want to analyze them for these down here for your stakeholder mapping. They're called grids, dimensional grids, power and influence, power and interest, impact influence. You probably already do this, but you don't do it technically, do it in your head, right? Anything project you're working on, even if it's not work related, you're thinking, okay, this person is this way. Okay, how much influence they have, how much power do they have? Okay, how is that going to affect my project? It doesn't even have to be a work related project. Now we're just putting things in technical terms. Okay. Again, we talked about the stakeholder register, so I'm going to be quiet, let you kind of silently read that. This is a definition that's going to pop up on the exam, but you kind of already got a picture of it. Just going to read through that real quick. And if you pull up a project document, PMI has a list, just so you'll know. PMI has a for every process, in this case, stakeholder register or analyzing stakeholders, they have a corresponding document that you enter this information in. Well, if you pull up a PMI document that says stakeholder register, it would look like this. So what we're trying to do here is, yes, we're going to explain what the register is, but then show you what it looks like, right? Anybody ever worked with a stakeholder register before?
Yes,
Who's yes?
it's Maria.
Okay. This is like I get take of this when you're at that EPMO,
Correct.
or
Yeah.
you're doing okay.
Yeah, and it was really important to have this this document to ensure that as we were going through the different stages of the project, that we were meeting the right expectations of the different stakeholders. And also there's another important piece, which is in the governance.
Yep.
Yeah. So for the governance, having both how the project was mapped to the how it was mapped to the company objectives, and those could be very different things between looking at from a company standpoint. Let's say looking at it from top down, the objectives could be one, while as looking at it from the bottom up, maybe by divisions, by departments, the expectations and the objectives could be different. So having something like this for the PM was very useful to know that you're managing those expectations and that you are covering everything. So there are no loops or any gaps. One of the projects that the previous slide you had about the positives and the negatives, and how they could be different between, go forward one, how they could be different with the stakeholders, being impacted negatively or positively. One of the projects that I worked on, for example, it was about uncovering some accounts receivables issues. And in doing the project, in leading the project, we were able to find that there was a gap of over $100 million.
Wow.
That was missing. So this was a very valuable project, but looking at the stakeholders, it meant different things for them. For example, the folks that obviously were in the finance side or in the accounting side, it meant that, hey, they didn't have all of their ducks in a row, and this project was able to identify that. But for the ones that would have been the client of those, of the accounting, for them, of course, it represented something different, because it showed that, well, then this other group is not doing what they're supposed to, because we found that there is a gap. So it certainly, it's kind of, for me, it illustrated that absolutely the stakeholders can have very different ways of affecting the project, both positive and negative, and their expectations can be completely opposite. And that's something that when you're leading a project, you don't always see when you enter into it.
Yeah. And again, we're going to get to this eventually, and we're on a slow roll right now, but this is very important. This is how, again, that's why I want you to see that the process chart. This is the first thing you do in project management. After someone says there's going to be a project, you as a PM, especially for the exam, one of the first things you start doing, actually there's two, but we'll get to the other one later, is stakeholder register. You got to know who's involved. Well, no, you're not going to know all that yourself. That's what that term expert judgment is. That's where your subject matter experts, they're going to know people. And then functional managers are going to know people. Your sponsor is going to know people. It's important that you know just about everybody that you can that's going to be involved in that project. What if there's some major person that's out of the country, some senior vice president that's out of the country, and then this guy gets back or she gets back 6 months later when you're well into the project? Well, and they got power and influence. Think about that. They got power and influence. Oh no, I want wings on this car. Well, guess what you got to do?
How would you know if he's out of the country? How would you know he's a stakeholder? Like just due diligence or?
Well, for me personally, I'm going to give you my experience when I was, especially at Clark Atlanta University, when I had to meet with the cabinet, which was the business officer, the senior vice president of the cabinet, every other Thursday. And the president of the university would actually be in there sometime. What I did on day one, and I've learned this from screwing up when I was a young PM, I would ask for 1 or 2 proxies from each person. In other words, somebody's going to represent you when you're not around, right? And make sure they understand the best interests of what you represent. So I always give 1 or 2 proxies, right? But I mean, coming out of the gate as a PM, you won't know that unless you get burned. Well, I got burned. So proxies and a constant, well, it comes down to communication management, which we hadn't gotten to yet, a constant flow of communication between those major power stakeholders. I'll know through just an email, well, I'm leaving the country. But just in case, I don't know, proxies. And if that person's not around, I'm always contacting, I always copy the proxies on email addresses. But it's because I got burned. So.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so this is one of the first important documents, not the last. And this, just think about that. Just running the stakeholder analysis, that's a lot of work. Think about all this stuff you got to do in that process chart. People ask, well, we used to get paid a lot. I'm glad I got out. Project managers do not get paid enough to me. They just don't. But that's my little pet peeve, because you have a lot of responsibility. I mean, a ton, right? It's it's starting to creep back up a little bit now, meaning the salary and the from a contract standpoint, the hourly rates. But you have a lot to take on. Just this one little thing you would think that's enough job for anybody, but this is just beginning. Right. So that's one of the first things we do. Again, Maria mentioned the RACI chart. Right. So read that. But you guys kind of read every definition. You just kind of solidly read it. I don't want to read that stuff to you. And it tells you what RACI stands for: responsible, whether the person is responsible for an action, activity, whatever, right? Or whether they are accountable. That's 2 different things. Whether they just need to be consulted or just being kept informed. And this is what an actual RACI chart looks like. Well, they can all look differently. This is a standard blueprint from PMI. All right, so you see the roles like a project manager. They only accountable for the blueprints. They just need to be kept informed about the manufacturer circuit board, which they do as part of the team, or tested circuit board. Just need to be consulted about order components. So it just gives, this is another document. I've never used this before, ever. But again, I mentioned the term tailoring, just because this is just a standard project management standard. When you get to your own projects, some of you are already doing them, you tailor some of these recommendations that PMI puts out there, because again, it's product agnostic and it's industry agnostic. You tailor it to your particular company, you tailor it to your particular project. But in general, if you did it, bit by bit with PMI and create all this stuff, I mean, you have a heck of a project run. All right. So now we're kind of finished with the individual. We've done stakeholder, identified stakeholders, kind of took them through the mill initially about analyzing them, kind of done the RACI chart thing to tell whether who's accountable, whether they need to be consulted. Now we're talking about team skills appraisal. So remember, we're still under the heading of creating a high performance team and under the lesson plan of building a team. So we've been individual, now we're at the team level, right? So appraisals, the project leaders, we have to perform assessment of the team in general for the skills, the aptitude, attitude, the work style, and other characteristics. And again, as we've all learned, you don't blurt out what you think about a person, right? I mean, but you do know and keep it internally. That lets you know from a self-aware standpoint, from their end and your end, how to deal with them. And that's where that emotional intelligence come in. We've been practicing all this stuff all along. They just have technical terms now, right? So when we assess our team members and teams in general, what we're trying to do is, identify strengths and weaknesses. And I'm pretty sure you guys have heard the term SWOT analysis. A lot of companies perform that anyway on their own company, strengths and weaknesses. Assess opportunities for improvement. I like that term, assess opportunities for improvement, instead of criticizing someone, which servant leaders are not supposed to do, right? All this helps build trust, right? Helps you identify team preferences, aspirations of each individual, things like that. Then, after assessing our team and team skill sets, and it's not in order in which we have to do this, we have what we call pre-assignment tools, right? So even before we start a project, sometimes you rarely would get this. I've never gotten pre-assignment, you know, but these are some of the things that you look at. Attitudinal surveys, specific assessments on individuals or groups, their abilities test, which is huge, right? One thing that's come into fray because we are virtual, even before that, the internet back in 95, I mean, it really made us one big family, right? I mean, you could sell some, I mean, I remember when this thing really took off back in 95, that was at the beginning part of my career, you know, and it just really took off. And Microsoft really did a good job back then anyway, with connecting the users, end users at the desktop and laptop level with that, with their utility, meaning, you know, Microsoft Windows, right? It made it, you know, really Apple started it with the Macintosh, but they got really, well, I saw it happen. It wasn't as open. But anyway, diversity, equity, and inclusion, you'll see a lot more of this in the emotional intelligence. We all know what that means in terms of, again, as project managers, as leaders, we will have diverse groups of individuals. And it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with your region, where you come from. I've had people on my team that are not from Atlanta, but they're out west. Attitude totally different. Kick back, laid back, always late for the meeting. But that's because of the region they live in, right? So all that is part of team. What you need out of here, this is another process. If you look on your process chart, and I'm going to be pointing this thing, look at on your process chart, if you look at 9.1 on your process chart, you'll see resource management plan. So as you 9.1, I'm sorry, 9.1. Oh, somebody's looking at that thing. Good. So kind of read the definition of resource management plan. This is what you as a project manager is supposed to develop when it comes to resources. Again, that's why I want that process chart out there, because there should be a number next to this. And it confuses people. So if you're looking at it in the process chart, well, you can identify these processes initially. Anyway, the resource management plan is a component of the entire project management plan. It describes how the project resources, meaning people, supplies, materials, are going to be allocated, acquired, monitored, and controlled. That's what the resource management plan is, which this is what it tells right here. In short, this is another major document. The resource management plan, again, tells how it's a component of the project management plan, but it describes how the resources, meaning people and material, are going to be acquired, allocated, and monitored. Okay. Virtual teams, we're all used to looking at that now. This took us by storm. I mean, we're already doing virtual teams, but COVID really brought that to light in terms of usage. And now you see a lot of companies not even going back to, you know, in-house. You know, depends on the industry that you're in. So virtual teams, as we already know, are not co-located. So we've already experienced this. We're experiencing it now, even on this course. I used to have to fly somewhere to instruct this, you know, this course. Now I don't, right? Actually, I like it better. So I don't really have to explain virtual teams to you. There's nothing new to this. And we're going to cover this a little bit more in terms of how to identify with processes. But virtual teams are what we're doing now. Okay. Some of the considerations with virtual teams, as we've all experienced, if you look at the top row, these are some of the benefits of virtual teams. If you read through that top row, you can find ideal skill sets, lowers workplace costs, which is what companies are really looking at now. From what I can understand, you got a lot of you guys are in healthcare, so there's no virtual hospital thing going on. But for the rest of us, you know, virtual teams are high. Avoids relocation expenses. These are some of the pluses. And some of this will be on the exam, right? These are easy question answers because we're already experiencing. The middle row, these are some of the challenges with virtual teams, managing communications, enabling effective team performance, bonding. I mean, there's no more meeting at the water fountain with virtual teams, right? The last row are some of the solutions to those challenges, right? So kind of read through that: trial communications, technology, which is what we use now, Zoom and internet, focus on calendar management. These are some of the solutions. Assigning project responsibility. Again, we brought up the term tailoring before, right? So with traditional project management and agile, if you combine them both, they are called hybrid. Under traditional, in terms of project assignments or responsibilities, we have what we call a WBS. If you see that at the bottom, it's called a work breakdown structure. Anybody ever heard of a work breakdown structure?
Hey, Kevin, I actually have a question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
On the previous page, you said the third row was the solution. Can you repeat what the first and second rows are?
Oh, the first row are when it comes to virtual teams, the top row are some of the benefits. They're considered benefits. That's a good thing, right?
Right.
Find ideal skill sets. It definitely lowers the workplace costs and avoids relocation expenses. These are some of the benefits of having virtual teams.
Yeah.
The middle row are some of the challenges.
Okay, perfect.
Associated
Thank you.
with. Then the third row is some of the solutions.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. So again, we're still talking about people. In this case, we're talking about, again, project assignments. You're catering, where you're tailoring it towards team needs. With agile or the adaptive side, there's two sides of the house now. And some of you already know this. You got your traditional waterfall project management, which is the old style. And then you have the adaptive style, right? We're going to cover that tomorrow before we get any further. But today, just think of, Agile or Scrum. Those teams are self-organizing. So from a project management standpoint, you don't have to assign anything to them. Under that framework, meaning Agile and Scrum, you're really supposed to leave them alone. Let them self-organize. So again, we're talking about building a high-performance team. And Agile and Scrum and Kanban, those teams are supposed to be self-organizing. So what they're telling you is, if that pops up, oh, you have a Scrum team or an Agile team, what are their project assignments? Well, that's not your business. That's not your job as a project manager. Now, traditional waterfall or predictive, which is what we normally work in today, yes, you do assign work to team members. So that's the difference. Adaptive, meaning Agile and Scrum, self-organizing. You leave them alone. They run their own show. Traditional, again, more autocratic. Yeah, you do work assignment. Okay. Rates, we all understand rates. I'm not going to cover that a lot. Again, some of the things you want to look at with rates is availability, definitely experience and knowledge in the skill set aptitude. Okay. And this is definitely rates towards human resources. When it comes to resource assignment, our job expects to document each team member assigned to the project, their roles and responsibilities, everything that we've talked about up to this point, and create what we call a project team directory. Simple. Again, going back to emotional intelligence and that servant or transformational leader, nurturing team performance. In other words, that autocratic stuff is kind of out the window, even in traditional project management. So what you're looking at is make sure the knowledge and skills, attributes, and experience of each team member is up to par when it comes to delivering whatever outcome your project is supposed to be doing. You're supposed to check for gaps frequently within your team and each team member, right, to make sure everybody's still on track, right? Not pulling somebody off the side, running, telling the manager, this person is no good. Your job is to make sure the person is up to speed. That's your job. And it's going to show up that way on the exam. Make sure knowledge transfer occurs between teams and team members. We're probably already doing this in our own works. Well, you have to, right? There's no way around. There's no more, I'm a programmer, so I'm going to go sit in the corner and program this and develop this program, and nobody's going to know what it is. Well, that's not the popular thing anymore, to be the only person that knows something. Now we're in shared knowledge in this point. And that's what they're trying to get to here. That's pretty simple. We're already experiencing that.